The gunshots cracked through the frozen silence before Willa Reed even understood what was happening. 3 bodies dropping into the blood-stained snow, while the remaining 2 men stumbled backward with their hands reaching uselessly for weapons they would never draw in time. Willa's breath came in ragged clouds of white vapor as she pressed herself against the rough bark of the pine tree behind her. Her fingers numb inside her thin gloves, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst through her ribs. She had been traveling from Sacramento to meet her aunt in Denver, taking the mountain route against everyone's advice because it shaved off 2 weeks of travel time. The stagecoach had broken an axle 3 days ago in these Colorado mountains, and the driver had left her at a trading post while he went for help. She had grown restless waiting and decided to walk toward the next settlement, certain it could not be more than a few miles away. Then the storm had come, and then these men, surrounding her with cruel grins and crueler intentions. Now a rider sat on a massive roan horse, smoke still curling from the barrel of his revolver, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat crusted with snow. He was tall in the saddle, his shoulders broad beneath a heavy coat, and even from 20 feet away, Willa could see the hard set of his jaw, the way his eyes tracked the 2 remaining men with the focused intensity of a predator. "You boys got about 3 seconds to disappear before you join your friends," the cowboy said, his voice carrying easily through the muffled quiet of the snowfall. It was not a loud voice, but it held absolute certainty, the kind of tone that made arguments seem pointless. The 2 men scattered like rabbits, crashing through the underbrush and vanishing into the white forest. The cowboy watched them go, then holstered his gun with practiced ease and swung down from his horse. His boots crunched in the snow as he approached Willa, and she found herself unable to move, unable to speak, still trying to process the violence that had exploded and ended in the span of perhaps 10 heartbeats. "You hurt?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of slate. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, pale against his wind-burned skin. Willa shook her head, then found her voice. "No. I mean, I am cold, but they did not touch me. You arrived before they could." The words came out shakier than she wanted, and she hated the way her voice trembled. "Good." He glanced at the 3 bodies, his expression unreadable, then back at her. "Quinn Crawford. I have a camp about 2 miles south of here, got a fire and supplies. Storm is getting worse and you cannot stay out here. Willa Reed." She pushed away from the tree, her legs unsteady. "I was trying to reach the next town. Nearest town is Leadville, and that is a good 15 miles through this terrain in good weather. In this," he gestured at the heavy snow falling around them, "you would be dead by nightfall. Come on." There was no gentleness in his words, but there was a practical kindness, and Willa was cold enough and frightened enough to recognize good sense when she heard it. She nodded and let him help her onto his horse. Then he swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. The warmth of him at her back was startling after hours in the cold, and she found herself leaning into it without quite meaning to. They rode in silence through the deepening storm, the world narrowing to just the sound of hoofbeats muffled by snow, and the rhythm of Quinn's breathing behind her. Willa's mind kept circling back to those 3 gunshots, how fast it had happened, how those men had been alive, and then simply were not. She had never seen anyone die before. Her life in Sacramento had been quiet, ordinary, full of piano lessons and church socials, and the endless tedium of being a 22-year-old unmarried woman in a city that viewed such creatures with suspicion. Quinn's camp turned out to be a small line shack tucked against a cliff face. barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a stone fireplace and a door that closed against the wind. He helped her down from the horse and led the animal to a lean-to shelter beside the shack, then came back and ushered her inside. The interior was dim but blessedly warmer than outside, with embers still glowing in the fireplace. Quinn set about building up the fire while Willa stood dripping melted snow onto the wooden floor, her entire body shaking now that she had stopped moving. "Get out of that wet coat," Quinn said without looking at her, feeding kindling to the flames. "There are blankets in the corner. Wrap yourself up before you catch pneumonia." Willa's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her coat, clumsy with cold. She finally got it off and draped it over a chair near the fire, then found the pile of blankets and cocooned herself in 2 of them. Quinn had a pot of coffee heating over the fire now, and the smell of it made her realize how long it had been since she had eaten or drunk anything warm. "Those men," she said, then stopped, not sure what question she was even asking. Quinn poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drifters, probably. Mountains are full of them this time of year, men who did not make it to the mining camps or who got run out of them. They see a woman alone and they figure she is easy pickings." He poured a second cup for himself and sat down on a log stool across from her. "What were you doing out there by yourself?" Willa explained about the stagecoach, the impatient decision to walk, the storm that had come up faster than she expected. As she talked, Quinn listened without interrupting, his eyes on her face, and she found herself noticing details about him. The way his hands wrapped around the coffee cup, scarred knuckles and calloused palms, the kind of hands that knew hard work. The way he sat, utterly still, like a man used to long hours of waiting, the intelligence in his gaze sharp and assessing. "You are lucky I was tracking those men," Quinn said when she finished. "I have been following them for 3 days. They robbed a ranch house outside of Fairplay, killed the rancher and his son. Sheriff put together a posse, but most of the men turned back when the weather got bad. I kept going." "Why?" The question slipped out before Willa could stop it. Quinn's jaw tightened. "Because I knew that rancher. Good man, did not deserve what they did to him." He set down his coffee cup. "And because someone has to do these things, or men like that just keep taking what they want from whoever they want." There was something in his voice, an old anger, carefully controlled. Willa wondered what had happened to put it there. What losses Quinn Crawford had suffered that made him the kind of man who rode alone through mountain blizzards hunting killers. She wanted to ask, but the set of his shoulders told her it was not a story he was ready to share. They sat in silence as the storm raged outside, the wind howling against the walls of the little shack. Quinn produced some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, and they ate a sparse meal while the fire crackled and spat. The warmth was slowly seeping back into Willa's bones, and with it came exhaustion, the kind that made her limbs feel like lead and her eyelids impossibly heavy. "You should sleep," Quinn said, noticing. "I will keep watch. Storm should break by morning, and then I will take you to Leadville." "What about you?" Willa asked. "When do you sleep? I will manage." He stood and added more wood to the fire. "Been doing this a long time. I know how to keep going." Willa wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She curled up on the floor near the fire, wrapped in blankets, and let her eyes drift closed. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Quinn settling onto his stool, his rifle across his knees, his profile sharp and watchful in the firelight. She woke sometime in the deep night to find the fire still burning and Quinn still awake, still keeping guard. Something about that steadfastness made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. In her world, men were merchants and lawyers and gentlemen who courted women with flowers and stilted conversation. They were not men who rode through blizzards to hunt down killers, who shot 3 men before they could move to save a stranger's life. They were not men who sat awake all night to keep someone safe. When she woke again, pale gray light was filtering through the gaps around the door, and Quinn was frying salt pork in a pan over the fire. The smell made her stomach growl, and he glanced over with something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "Storm passed," he said. "Coffee is hot." They ate quickly, both of them eager to be moving. The cold was brutal when they stepped outside, but the sky was clear and crystalline blue, the sun glinting off endless expanses of white. Quinn saddled his horse and helped Willa up, then swung on behind her again. The ride to Leadville took most of the day, following treacherous mountain trails where the horse had to pick its way carefully through deep drifts. Willa found herself hyper-aware of Quinn behind her, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the way his arms bracketed her as he held the reins. They talked in fits and starts, sharing fragments of their lives. She learned that Quinn had been born in Missouri, that his family had been killed during the border troubles before the war, that he had drifted west afterward with nothing but a horse and a gun. He had worked as a ranch hand, a scout, a deputy marshal in a handful of towns that no longer existed. He was 26 years old and had seen more violence and death than most men twice his age. He learned that Willa was the daughter of a merchant, that she had lived her whole life in Sacramento's quiet respectability, until her mother died last year, and her father remarried a woman who made it clear there was no room for a grown stepdaughter in her household. The aunt in Denver was her mother's sister, the only family Willa had left who wanted her. "Sounds lonely," Quinn said quietly. "It was." Willa hesitated, then added, "It is." His arms tightened around her fractionally, just for a moment, and Willa felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Leadville appeared in the late afternoon, a sprawling mining town clinging to the mountainside, all raw timber buildings and muddy streets churned into frozen ruts. Quinn took her to a boarding house run by a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Halloran, who looked Willa up and down and then nodded approvingly at Quinn. "You did right bringing her here," Mrs. Halloran said. "I will get her fed and into a proper bed. Stage comes through in 3 days, weather permitting. 3 days." Willa felt something like panic flutter in her stomach. 3 days, and then she would be gone, continuing to Denver and whatever life waited for her there. 3 days, and she would never see Quinn Crawford again. Quinn must have seen something in her face, because after he paid Mrs. Halloran for the room and board, he caught Willa's hand and said, "I will be around town for a few days. Need to report to the sheriff about those men resupply, if you need anything." "Where will you be?" The words came out too fast, too desperate. "Murphy's saloon, most likely." "Ask anyone, they will point you there." He squeezed her hand once, his calloused palm rough against her skin, then let go and turned toward the door. "Quinn." He stopped, looked back. "Thank you for my life." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. "Just doing what needed doing." Then he was gone, his bootsteps echoing on the wooden porch, and Willa was left standing in the boarding house parlor feeling like something essential had just walked out of her life before she even understood what it was. Mrs. Halloran put her to work immediately, insisting that idle hands were the devil's playthings. Willa spent the afternoon helping with laundry and cooking, grateful for the distraction. But that night, lying in a narrow bed in a room she shared with 2 other women travelers, she could not stop thinking about Quinn, about the way he had shot those men without hesitation to save her, about his hands on the reins, careful and competent, about the loneliness she had heard in his voice when he talked about his life, a loneliness that matched her own. She found herself at Murphy's saloon the next afternoon, telling herself she just wanted to thank him properly, knowing it was a lie. The saloon was a rough place, full of miners and gamblers and working girls, and Willa drew stares the moment she walked through the door in her respectable gray traveling dress. She spotted Quinn at a corner table, playing cards with 3 other men, and when he looked up and saw her, his expression went from surprise to something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken. He excused himself from the game and came to her, guiding her by the elbow to a quieter spot near the bar. "What are you doing here? This is not the kind of place for a woman like you. I wanted to see you." The honesty in her own voice surprised her. "I realized I never properly thanked you." "You thanked me yesterday." But he was smiling slightly, and up close she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "That was not proper. That was just words." Willa took a breath, gathering her courage. "Will you have dinner with me? There is a restaurant attached to the boarding house. Mrs. Halloran says it is respectable." Quinn studied her for a long moment, and Willa had the unsettling sense that he could see right through her, could read all the confused feelings she was still trying to understand herself. Finally, he nodded. 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock, she agreed. He showed up precisely on time, clean-shaven and wearing what she suspected was his only good shirt. They sat across from each other at a small table, and for the first time since they met there was awkwardness between them, the weight of things unspoken making conversation difficult. But then Quinn started talking about his horse, a rambling story about buying the animal from a Ute trader, and Willa found herself laughing, and the awkwardness dissolved like morning mist. They talked for hours, long after their food was gone and the other diners had left. Quinn told her about Montana summers and Arizona deserts, about tracking outlaws through badlands and breaking horses on sprawling ranches. Willa told him about books she loved, about playing piano in her father's parlor, about the suffocating boredom of Sacramento society where every word and action was judged and weighed. The more they talked, the more Willa felt something building between them, a connection that seemed to bypass all the normal stages of courtship and friendship and go straight to something deeper, something that felt like recognition. "What will you do in Denver?" Quinn asked finally, his voice careful. "Live with my aunt, help her with her household, probably marry whoever she finds for me." The words tasted bitter. "It is what women like me do. You do not sound happy about it." "I am not." Willa met his eyes. "But what choice do I have? I have no money, no prospects. I cannot just wander the West like you do." "No," Quinn agreed quietly. "You cannot." But something in his face had closed off, and Willa knew she had said the wrong thing, had somehow highlighted the impossible distance between their worlds. The next day she did not see him, and the day after that the stage arrived, and Willa found herself packing her few belongings with hands that shook. Mrs. Halloran was kind but practical, reminding her that the stage would not wait and Denver was still a week's travel away. Willa nodded and smiled and said all the right things, while inside she felt like she was being torn in two. She was standing in the boarding house parlor, her bag at her feet, waiting for the stage driver to call for passengers, when Quinn walked through the door. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment they just stared at each other across the room. Then he was crossing to her, his long strides eating up the distance, and he caught her hands in his. "Do not go," he said. The raw urgency in his voice made her breath catch. "Stay here, stay with me." "Quinn, I cannot just stay. I have nowhere to go, no way to support myself. And you are always moving, always chasing the next job or the next outlaw. How could that possibly work? I am done with that." His hands tightened on hers. "I have been thinking about it since I met you. I am tired, Willa. Tired of drifting, tired of violence, tired of being alone. I have some money saved, enough to buy land." There is a valley north of here, good water and grazing. I could build us a house, start a ranch. It would be hard work, and I cannot promise you luxury or ease. But I can promise you a home and a man who loves you if you will have me." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "You love me. We have known each other 4 days." "I know." Quinn's voice was rough. "I know it is insane, but I looked at you in that snow and something in me just knew. And every minute since then has just made me more certain. I love you, Willa Reed. I love your courage and your laugh and the way you look at the world like it still holds wonders. I love the loneliness in you that matches mine. And if you get on that stage, I think I will regret it for the rest of my life." Tears spilled down her cheeks. In Sacramento, women did not make impulsive decisions. They did not throw away security and respectability for a man they had just met. They did not choose uncertain futures with cowboys over safe, boring lives with their aunts. But Willa Reed was discovering that she was not the woman Sacramento had tried to make her. She was someone braver, someone willing to gamble on the wild, impossible hope blooming in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will stay. I will marry you." Quinn's face transformed, the careful guardedness dropping away to reveal pure joy. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her there in the boarding house parlor with Mrs. Halloran watching and clucking disapprovingly, and the stage driver calling for passengers outside. It was Willa's first real kiss, and it was everything the novels had promised and more, dizzy and desperate and perfect. They were married that afternoon by a justice of the peace, with Mrs. Halloran and the local blacksmith as witnesses. The ceremony was short and practical, but when Quinn slipped a plain gold band onto Willa's finger and promised to love and cherish her, she knew she had made the right choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Quinn found his valley, a beautiful stretch of land cradled between mountains, with a creek running through it and grass enough for cattle. He bought it from an old trapper who was heading to California, paid cash, and they spent their first night as landowners sleeping under the stars wrapped in blankets, looking up at a sky so full of stars it took Willa's breath away. "I never imagined this," she said softly. "Never imagined I could be so happy." Quinn pulled her closer. "Neither did I. Thought I would live and die alone. Then you came into my life and changed everything." They built their house that summer with help from neighboring ranchers who appeared as if by magic once word spread that Quinn Crawford was settling down. It seemed he had earned respect during his years drifting, had helped people, and made friends without even realizing it. The house was small but sturdy, with a good stone fireplace and windows that caught the morning sun. Willa learned to cook over an open fire, to tend a vegetable garden, to help with the horses Quinn began breeding. It was back-breaking work, so different from her old life she sometimes could not believe they were the same person. But she had never been happier. Their first winter was hard. Snow came early and heavy, and there were nights when Willa huddled by the fire and wondered if they would make it through. But Quinn was tireless, checking on the animals, hunting for meat, keeping them fed and warm. And in the evenings they would sit together and talk for hours, or read aloud from the small collection of books they had accumulated, or simply hold each other in the firelight. Willa learned her husband's body that winter, the map of scars across his back and chest, each one a story of violence survived. She learned his moods, the way he went quiet when he was worried, the way he smiled with just the corner of his mouth when she said something that pleased him. Spring came like a revelation, the world turning green overnight. They bought cattle with the last of Quinn's savings, a small herd but a start. More neighbors appeared to help with the roundup, and Willa found herself part of a community she had not known existed. Ranch wives who taught her to preserve food and treat sick animals, men who respected Quinn's skills and treated him like a brother. It was nothing like Sacramento's rigid society, but it was genuine in a way that Sacramento had never been. That summer Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Quinn one evening after dinner, and he went completely still, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" His voice was careful, like he was afraid to hope. "I am sure." Willa took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Quinn's eyes filled with tears, something she had never seen before. "I never thought I would have this. A family. After losing mine, I never let myself imagine it could happen again." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I will keep you both safe. I swear it." The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick for months, could barely keep food down. Quinn was patient and steady, caring for her with a gentleness that made her fall in love with him all over again. As her belly swelled, he talked to the baby, his hands splayed across her skin, telling stories about the ranch and the mountains and the life they were building. Their son was born in February, in the middle of a snowstorm, with only Quinn and a neighboring ranch wife to help. The labor was long and brutal, and there were moments when Willa was certain she was going to die. But finally, after hours of pain, she heard a baby's cry, thin and outraged, and the ranch wife was placing a tiny squirming bundle in her arms. "A boy," Quinn said, his voice full of wonder. He was sitting beside her, his face streaked with tears. "We have a son." They named him Matthew, and he had Quinn's dark hair and Willa's blue eyes. Quinn was a natural father, completely unafraid of the tiny baby, changing diapers and walking the floor at night when Matthew fussed. Watching him cradle their son, Willa sometimes felt like her heart would burst from the sheer intensity of her love for both of them. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered, slowly but steadily. They added rooms to the house, bought more cattle, hired a young ranch hand to help with the heavy work. Matthew grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious boy who followed his father everywhere, pestering him with endless questions. When Matthew was 3, Willa gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, and their house rang with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of children. Quinn proved to be every bit as devoted a father as Willa had known he would be. He taught Matthew to ride, to rope, to read tracks in the dirt. He was gentle with the twins, letting them climb on him like he was a mountain, braiding their hair with surprising skill. He and Willa fell into rhythms and routines, the comfortable patterns of a long marriage. But there were still moments when she would catch him looking at her across the dinner table, or in the barn, or in their bed at night, and the heat in his eyes reminded her that they were not just parents and partners but lovers still. One evening, when Matthew was 10 and the twins were 7, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the warm air. Quinn had his arm around Willa, and she was leaning into him the way she had learned to do, fitting against his side like a puzzle piece finding its place. "You ever regret it?" Quinn asked suddenly. "Giving up your old life for this?" Willa looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment." "Do you regret settling down?" "God, no." Quinn pulled her closer. "Sometimes I think about that day in the snow, how close I came to not being there. If I had turned back with the rest of the posse, if I had taken a different trail. You would have died, or those men would have taken you, and I would have never known you existed, never had any of this." He gestured at the house, the land, the children. "It terrifies me how easily it might never have happened." "But it did happen," Willa said firmly. "You were there. You saved me, and we built this life together. That is what matters." Quinn kissed her temple. "I love you more now than I did the day I asked you to stay. Did not think that was possible, but I do. I love you too." Willa turned to kiss him properly, and their children made exaggerated gagging sounds from the yard, which made them both laugh. As the years went on, they watched their children grow and thrive. Matthew became a skilled horseman, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. The twins were inseparable, both of them with their mother's love of books and their father's practical competence. They had more children, another son and another daughter, and the house they had built together filled with life and love and the thousand small moments that make up a family. Quinn's hair grayed early, going silver at the temples by his 40th birthday. He joked that it was from chasing after 5 children, but Willa suspected it was from all those hard years before they met, from violence and loss and loneliness. Her own hair stayed dark longer, though fine lines appeared around her eyes, what Quinn called her smile lines. They earned more scars over the years, calluses and aches, the marks of a life lived fully. But they were happy, deeply and profoundly happy in a way that Willa knew was rare and precious. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been, standing in that snow surrounded by men with cruel intentions. Thought about how terrified and alone she had felt. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, these children. Could never have imagined becoming the kind of woman who could birth a calf or break a horse, or keep a household running through hard winters and harsh summers. Could never have imagined falling asleep every night in the arms of a man who had killed to protect her, and then spent the rest of his life making sure she knew she was cherished. When Willa was 45, her aunt in Denver finally tracked her down, having spent years trying to find out what happened to the niece who never arrived. She sent a letter that was equal parts relieved and reproachful, inviting Willa to visit and bring her family. They made the trip that summer, all 7 of them piling into a wagon for the journey to Denver. Her aunt was shocked by the woman Willa had become. Strong and sun-browned and capable, nothing like the soft city girl who had left Sacramento all those years ago. She was even more shocked by Quinn, who was quiet and polite but clearly uncomfortable in the city, and by the children who were wild and free in ways Denver children were not. The visit was awkward and strange, and Willa was relieved when they headed home, back to the mountains and the ranch and the life they had built. "That could have been your life," Quinn said on the ride home, gesturing back toward Denver. "Proper society, servants, all of that." Willa laughed. "That would never have been my life. Even if I had made it to Denver, even if I had married whoever my aunt found for me, I would have been miserable. I was always meant for this for you. I just did not know it yet." As they grew older, their children began leaving to build their own lives. Matthew married a rancher's daughter and started his own spread in the next valley over. The twins went to Denver for school, and though they both eventually returned to Colorado, they settled in towns rather than ranches. Their younger children were still finding their paths, but Willa and Quinn took pride in watching them discover who they were meant to be. When Willa turned 50, Quinn surprised her with a trip to San Francisco. They had never traveled for pleasure before, had barely left the ranch except for necessity. But business was good and Matthew was managing things, and Quinn said he wanted to show his wife the ocean. They took the train, marveling at how fast the world had changed, how the wild territories they had known were becoming states with railroads and telegraph lines. San Francisco was overwhelming and wonderful, and Willa loved every minute of it. But her favorite moment came when they stood on the beach at sunset, watching waves crash against the shore. Quinn held her hand and they were silent for a long time, just being together. "Thank you," Willa said finally. "For what? The trip? For everything. For saving my life. For giving me this life. For loving me all these years." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his weathered face. You are the best man I have ever known, Quinn Crawford. I have never regretted choosing you, not for a single heartbeat. Quinn pulled her close, and she felt his chest hitch with emotion. You saved me too, you know. I was dead inside before I met you, just walking and breathing but not really alive. You gave me a reason to live again, gave me love and family and home. Everything good in my life came from that moment. I decided not to turn back, to keep tracking those men into the mountains. Best decision I ever made. They stood there on the beach as the sun sank into the Pacific. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that unlikely meeting. Behind them was a lifetime of work and love, struggle and joy, the kind of partnership that sustained through hardship and celebrated through triumph. Ahead of them were more years together, grandchildren to spoil, a ranch to pass on to the next generation. When they finally returned home, the whole family was waiting for them. Children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a surprise celebration. There was food and music, laughter echoing off the mountains. Quinn stood with Willa on the porch, watching their family, and she knew he was feeling the same overwhelming gratitude that filled her. Their youngest daughter, Clara, approached them with a baby in her arms. "Papa, Mama, I want you to meet someone. This is William Quinn, named for his grandfathers." Willa took the baby, marveling at his tiny, perfect features, and felt Quinn's arm come around her waist. Another generation, another link in the chain they had started that day in the snow. She thought about how one moment of violence had led to all of this love, how the worst and best things in life were sometimes separated by a heartbeat. "He is beautiful," Quinn said softly, touching the baby's cheek with a calloused finger. They stayed on the porch late into the night, even after most of the family had gone to bed or headed back to their own homes. Just the two of them and the stars, like that first night in their valley all those years ago. Quinn pulled Willa close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and wood smoke and home. "You remember that first conversation we had?" Willa asked. "In the line shack when I asked why you kept tracking those men. I remember. You said someone had to do these things or bad men would just keep taking what they wanted. You were right, but I think there is more to it than that. I think you were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there, not just for justice, but for us. For this." She gestured at the house, the land, the legacy they had built. Everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have thought about that too. All the choices that led me to that moment, all the roads I walked that brought me to you. If I believe in anything like fate or destiny, it is that we were meant to find each other." "And love each other," Willa added. "And love each other," Quinn agreed. He kissed her, slow and sweet, a kiss that held decades of devotion. "Always and forever, Willa Crawford. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you to me," Willa whispered against his lips. They stood there together under the stars, two people who had started as strangers in a snowstorm and become each other's home. Behind them was a house full of children and grandchildren, the fruits of their love. Around them was land they had worked and nurtured into prosperity. Above them were the same mountains that had witnessed their beginning, silent and eternal. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and blessings. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with young voices during holidays. Matthew's ranch prospered and expanded. The twins married good men and started families. Their younger children found their paths, bringing pride and joy in equal measure. Quinn and Willa grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They spent their days working on the ranch at a gentler pace, their evenings on the porch watching sunsets. Quinn's hands became gnarled with arthritis, but they were still gentle when they touched Willa. Her hair went completely white, but Quinn still called her beautiful. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were over 40 people present, all connected to that moment in the snow when Quinn had fired 3 shots and changed both their lives forever. During dinner, Matthew stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every single day. That family is the greatest wealth. That hard work and kindness matter more than anything else. We are all here because you found each other and built something worth continuing. Thank you for the example you have set, and for the love you have given us." The family cheered and drank, and Willa felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Quinn squeezed her hand under the table, his eyes bright with emotion. Later, when they were alone in their bedroom, he pulled her into his arms and they danced slowly to music only they could hear. 30 years, Quinn said wonderingly. "Feels like forever and like no time at all." "I would do it all again," Willa said. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy. All of it exactly the same as long as it led me back to you." "Me too," Quinn said. "Though maybe next time we could meet somewhere warmer." Willa laughed and swatted his chest playfully. "Where would be the drama in that? No, I like our story exactly as it is. The snow, the danger, the heroic cowboy riding to the rescue." "Heroic?" Quinn raised an eyebrow. "I think you are romanticizing things." "Maybe," Willa agreed, "but you did save me, in more ways than you know." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, bodies that knew each other's rhythms and responses, hands that had mapped every inch of skin. It was different from the passion of their youth, but no less powerful, infused with decades of love and trust. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Quinn's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Willa felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible all those years ago in Sacramento. The seasons turned, bringing them into their 60s. Quinn's old injuries bothered him more, aches that predicted weather changes, stiffness that made mornings difficult. Willa developed a cough that lingered through one winter, worrying everyone until spring came and it finally cleared. They slowed down further, letting Matthew run more of the ranch operations, spending more time simply being together. On quiet afternoons, they would sit in the parlor and Willa would play the piano they had bought years ago, her fingers still nimble on the keys. Quinn would listen with his eyes closed, a slight smile on his face, transported by the music. Or they would read together, sharing books the way they had since the beginning. Or they would simply talk, never running out of things to say even after thousands of conversations. "Do you know what I love most about you?" Willa asked one day, apropos of nothing. Quinn looked up from his book. "Tell me." "The way you have never stopped choosing me. Every single day for 35 years, you have chosen to love me, to stay with me, to build this life with me. You could have kept drifting, kept being alone, but you chose to stay. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Quinn set down his book and came to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in his. "It was never a hard choice, Willa. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. Everything else in my life has been hard, but you have always been simple and true and right. If I have given you a gift, you have given me one 1,000 times greater. You gave me peace. You gave me purpose. You gave me everything." They kissed, and it still made Willa's heart flutter the way it had when she was 22 and falling in love for the first time. Some things, she had learned, never faded if you tended them properly. As they moved into their late 60s and then their 70s, the ranch remained their anchor. Children and grandchildren came and went. The land prospered under Matthew's stewardship, and Quinn and Willa settled into the gentle rhythms of old age. They moved slower, napped more, forgot things occasionally. But they were together, and that made everything bearable. Quinn still liked to ride out to check on the cattle, though he did not go as far as he once had. Willa still tended her garden, though she had help now. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the mountains turn purple in the twilight, holding hands like newlyweds. Their love had matured into something deep and abiding, roots grown so intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. On their 40th anniversary, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by family. Quinn's voice shook with emotion as he promised again to love and cherish Willa for the rest of his days. Willa's eyes brimmed with tears as she made the same promises. The justice of the peace who had married them 40 years ago was long dead, but his grandson performed the ceremony, completing a circle that felt ordained. That night, lying in bed, Quinn traced the lines of Willa's face with gentle fingers. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said. "I am old," Willa protested, though she was smiling. "You are mine," Quinn corrected, "and that makes you beautiful. Always has, always will." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, hearts beating in tandem, breathing synchronized. In the morning they would wake and face another day together, doing the work of maintaining a life and a love. They would drink coffee and discuss grandchildren and check on cattle and tend gardens. They would laugh and sometimes bicker and always, always return to each other. The years gifted them more memories. Great-grandchildren who called them Gee-Gee and Pop-Pop, anniversaries celebrated with increasing fanfare, birthdays marked by gatherings of their ever-expanding family. They grew frailer but not bitter, slower but not defeated. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy of love and hard work etched into the land itself. When Quinn turned 78, he began having trouble with his heart. The doctor said it was giving out after a lifetime of hard use, that there was nothing to be done except rest and medication. Quinn grumbled about being useless, but he followed orders, letting others do the heavy work while he supervised from the porch. Willa, now 74, stayed close to him, her presence a constant comfort. "I am not ready," Quinn told her one evening. They both knew what he meant. "Neither am I," Willa said, her hand tight in his. "But we have had 43 years, Quinn. 43 beautiful years that we never should have had. That is more than most people get." "Still not enough," Quinn said stubbornly. "Will never be enough time with you." But time was not theirs to command. Quinn's heart failed one night in his sleep, peacefully and without pain. He simply did not wake up, and Willa found him in the morning, his face relaxed and peaceful, finally at rest. The grief was crushing, a physical weight that made breathing difficult. But even through the pain, Willa felt gratitude for the life they had shared, the love that had sustained her for over 4 decades. They buried Quinn on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the valley he had chosen for them all those years ago. The whole family gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them there, because a cowboy had ridden into a snowstorm and saved a woman's life. During the service, Willa spoke about love and courage, about the man who had given her everything, about the life they had built from one moment of violence transformed into a lifetime of devotion. After everyone left, Willa stood alone by the grave, her hand resting on the simple wooden marker that bore his name. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for loving me, for all of it. I will see you again, my love. Wait for me." Willa lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, tending the ranch and the legacy she and Quinn had created. She spent her days remembering, telling stories to grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the cowboy who had saved her life and stolen her heart. She played the piano and worked in her garden and watched the mountains that had witnessed their entire love story. When her time came, she went peacefully, her hand held by Matthew, her face turned toward the window that looked out at Quinn's grave. Her last words were, "I am coming, my love." And then she was gone, slipping away to wherever he was waiting. They buried her beside Quinn on the hill, and carved into her marker were the words she had lived by. She chose love, and it chose her back. The ranch continued under Matthew's care, and eventually passed to his children, generation after generation maintaining the legacy that had started with 3 gunshots in the snow, and a cowboy brave enough to choose love. The land remembered them. Quinn and Willa Crawford, who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that unlikely meeting. Every sunset that painted the mountains gold, every spring when the valley burst into bloom, every child born into the family they had started was a testament to their love. They had been given one chance to find each other, and they had seized it with both hands, building a lifetime from a moment, a dynasty from devotion. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light hits just right, people standing on that porch swear they can see 2 figures on the hill, holding hands and watching the sunset, well, maybe that is just the way love endures. Maybe that is what happens when 2 people choose each other so completely that not even death can truly separate them. Maybe that is the legacy they left behind, proof that love, real love, never really ends. Their story lived on in the family they had created, passed down through generations as a reminder of what courage and devotion could build. The ranch prospered, expanding and adapting but never forgetting its roots. And always, every year on the anniversary of their meeting, the family gathered on that hill to remember the day a cowboy rode through a snowstorm, saved a woman's life, and found his own salvation in the process. It was a good story, a true story, a love story in the truest sense. And it had the ending that all the best love stories deserve. Not a fairy tale where nothing bad ever happens, but a real tale where 2 people faced hardship and joy together, held each other through storms literal and metaphorical, and built something that outlasted them both. They had loved deeply and lived fully, and in the end, that was all that mattered. They had found each other in the snow, and they had never let go.